What's up, everybody? I'm Mike Dwyer from the Bunker Recordings and BetterMixes.com, and today we're taking a look at a technique I've been using lately to get solid, consistent low end out of my bass tracks. So this is something I started doing not too long ago, but it's made a pretty big impact on my mixes. A while back, I made a video about splitting your bass onto two tracks, one for the low end and one for the high end, and compressing them separately before recombining them at the bass bus to get the low end super consistent. Or I think I mentioned in that video that you could also just use a multiband compressor to get similar results. I'll link that video up here if you haven't already seen it. But I was running into a problem with that technique. I like to use a lot of automation in my mixes, doing little moves like pushing the bass up when it's doing a cool little run, or maybe on the downbeat of important chord changes, to make the bass a little more audible for those parts. The problem was that if I wanted to push the bass up considerably at any point, yeah, it would be more audible, which was the goal, but that would also mean adding a lot of extra low end to the mix for that moment, which would sometimes make it boomy or muddy for a second. The solution is pretty obvious looking back, but it took me a long time to come up with this. So let's jump into Pro Tools to check out what I do now to deal with this. So first, let's take a quick look at the setup for this. So as you can see, I have two bass tracks. They are exactly the same. If I bypass all the plugins on them, we can see that. Just an exact duplicate of each other. Then from there, on each track, I have a compressor, just doing a little bit of light leveling before we hit our amp sim, which in this case is the Darkglass Ultra. And once again, that is exactly the same on both tracks. Now from there, we have an EQ on each one. And this here on my bass low, I am cutting out all the top end, everything above 150 Hertz. And then on my bass high track, I'm doing the exact opposite and cutting everything below 150 Hertz. So at this point, when you recombine these two tracks, we basically just have our original bass signal. And then on each one of the tracks, we have a compressor. In this case, I'm using the Waves MV2. This is my absolute favorite bass compressor. I seriously recommend giving it a shot. But any compressor that you like on bass will work fine here. So again, I have that same thing on both of them. And we're just compressing the heck out of both of these. Then from there, both of these tracks are going to my bass bus, where we have a little bit more processing. Just an instance of EQ, chopping out the fizzy top end, making a couple small moves there, then going through a tape emulator, and finally our bass to get a little bit of that extra low end coming through on small speakers. And like I said in the intro, I've got a whole other video talking about this whole splitting the bass into two technique. So without going too deep into it in this video, basically the idea is that by doing this, you'll get really, really consistent low end. Since this compressor here is just working on the low end, it really evens things out if one particular note doesn't have as much low end as the next. For instance, if the bass player goes up to a higher string or something like that, that doesn't have as much low end. This just locks all that down. But like I said, there was a problem with this technique. Previously, I would do automation on my bass bus here to push up any little parts that I wanted to cut through. But with that came all that extra low end. So now all that I do is I do separate automation on my low and high tracks. I do still have a little bit on my overall bass bus. You can see in the first half of the second verse and the first half of the bridge, for instance, I'm pushing all the bass up a little bit. But in general, the vast majority of my automation is on the bass high track. Again, I've got a little bit on the bass low, so I'm dipping the low end of the bass a little bit in the verses, for instance, or I guess just the first verse in this particular song. But that gives you a really simple way to control things like that. So again, in this example, having less low end in the bass in the verse allows the chorus to get a little bit bigger and a little bit fuller and a little bit more exciting. But because of all that compression we have on it, once it's at this level in the chorus, it just stays there. It is super consistent, even though we're doing all of these moves on our bass. So let's actually hear this in action. I'm going to play some of this chorus with the automation, then I'm going to turn the automation off so you can hear the difference. So here's with. And then without it. And one more time with it. So you can really hear with the automation how much some of these little licks are coming through. Just soloed, they even sound maybe a little bit too extreme, but in the context of the full mix, they help to just punch the bass through. But again, our low end is staying nice and consistent that whole time. So even though we're boosting like 3 decibels on this lick here, it's not getting boomy, it's not getting muddy. You're just hearing that mid-range definition push through. This technique made a big difference for me, and I bet it will for a lot of you too. So give it a shot in your next mix, and let me know how it works out for you. And if you like this video, be sure to leave a thumbs up, subscribe, comment, all that good stuff. It really helps the channel. And be sure to head on over to bettermixes.com to check out info on my mixing course, to find your new favorite drum samples, to find out about one-on-one mix coaching, and a whole lot more.